It's an unlikely spot for a police operation, but Kakapotahi in Southwestland fits the bill as the unlikely centre of a cold case murder. 26 years ago, David Robinson was an itinerant, living rough on the west coast and keeping mostly to himself. But one day, about a week before Christmas 1998, someone pointed a gun at his head and shot him between the eyes. Then that person, or persons, threw his body into the water, likely the Kakapotahi River and likely from that bridge behind me. Since then, anything else about what happened to David Robinson or why has remained a mystery. But now, police have a new suspect, and the case has new life. This week, police canvassed Kakapotahi, south of Hokitika, just as they did 26 years ago, hoping that locals could deliver a break in the case.
There was nobody you could think he's the sort of person that could do something like that. Not at all.
Mark Walsh and his wife are the last remaining locals from 1998. 26 years ago, he says, the only other people around Kakapotahi were whitebaiters and criminals.
I really suspect there's drugs involved, marijuana plots, you know. In those days, at times, out of the whitebait season, I quite often found plants and stuff down towards the beach and in amongst the gorse. So I think it was overdope. That's all I can think of. He was just an itinerant guy who was just wandering around from place to place, really.
David Robinson was 25 when he died. He'd left home in the North Island years before and slowly made his way south. He was a troubled youngster, but his mother, Joan Robinson, was still shocked when a detective walked up her driveway and told her her son was dead.
It's always extremely hard. Unless you've lived it and experienced this yourself, people don't really understand that. It's very tiring and it's very stressful. Hoping for a great outcome. When it doesn't happen, there's disappointment.
The police theory is that David's body flowed into the nearby Waitaha River and out to sea, where the currents washed it ashore on a remote beach to the north of Kakapotahi. David lay there for about 10 days before he was found. He was identified by fingerprints, but police had little else to go on. David was a loner who liked to move at night, so few people had seen him, let alone talked to him.
They've never given up on it. And I thought, well, that's pretty wonderful. I thought that you know, they've spent a lot of time and money on that case, and they're not giving up. They're just as hard on the case as they ever were.
One solid lead police had was a gunshot heard in Kakapotahi about the time David died. Locals back then said it was loud and during the day. Police didn't want to comment on who their new suspect was or whether the canvassing this week was linked to any evidence. But they did say they have reopened the case. Every year, on David's birthday, Joan visits the bridge at Kakapotahi to leave flowers and remember her son. With so little known about David's death, it's about all she has. But in the cemetery at Hokitika is the grave of the family friend who David John Robinson was named for. 26 years on, it's Joan's closest connection to David.
I think it strikes me when I just ponder that, just how he'd deliberately made himself a loner. I don't think it was necessary. I think it's sad that he didn't come back to John and I and approach us again. It's very difficult to know that with David, and I'll never know the answers to that. And of course he died at 25. What a waste of life, isn't it? That he never really got to experience anything except being a vagabond and a thief, really, and being in trouble.
David Robinson would be 52 next month. Joan believes her son's killer or killers will be older still, probably in their 60s, with children and even grandchildren of their own.
They're getting up there now, so they've had their time, they've had their family. So I would like to think that their consciences aren't that seared, but I believe they are, that they're never going to come forward willingly and say, hey, I shot your son. and this is the reason why.
But a mother's cynicism only stretches so far. More than anything, Joan Robinson wants justice.
And every few years it comes up, doesn't it? And that's just what it has felt like to me. But hopeful that this time there might be answers and there might be a result this time. But then I'm like that every time. You know, this means everything to me to have David's case solved. I don't want to leave this life having it unsolved. I want it solved. It's very stressful and traumatic for me. It was terribly difficult for John when he was alive to deal with. And people like, if this is true and this really did honestly happen, people like that need to understand that David was murdered, but it has a lifelong effect on family members.